your source for everything paranormal. Para-X. The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para-X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
During 2017, researchers Steve Mira and I, Barry Fitzgerald, travelled to the Southern Hemisphere to investigate the stuff of nightmares. Mummified remains, each possessing 3 fingers and 3 toes. Returning from Peru, we tell our story to Marla Brooks on our show Stirring the Cauldron, where we reveal the possible horror that may have haunted our species. We will also be speaking about our new project launch, On Stellar, a centralizing platform for all the fringe research worldwide. Join us on Para-X Radio for this 2-hour special on March the 29th.
The words I now shall call. Live you must, and let to live. Fairly take, and fairly give. Do what thou will, if it harms none. By the magic of all, may it be done. Greet the days and greet the night, with joy and thanks for all delights. 9 woods in the cauldron go, as above, so below. Welcome to Stirring the Cauldron on the Para-X Radio Network. And now, here's your host, Marla Brooks.
Hey, merry meet everybody, and welcome to another evening of cauldron stirring. Now, tonight's opening music was called The Chamber, and there are lots of people out there who might think that in order to do witchcraft and spellcrafting, that we all kind of have to have this little chamber-like hideaway to go to, and maybe some people really do. I guess I wouldn't mind having my own little chamber in a cave or a hut in the middle of the forest and away from everybody, but, you know, as wonderful as that sounds, spellcasting can be done anywhere. All it takes is learning about the most effective and efficient ways to make it happen, and that's why Jason Miller is here with us this evening. Now, Jason has devoted 25 years to studying practical magic in all its forms, and he's the author of several books on sorcery and spirituality. He's a teacher who runs courses on practical magic and meditation, a sorcerer who can help nudge the powers of probability in your favor. And now he's got a book out which can explain the 21 keys to successful sorcery called The Elements of Spellcasting. Now, if any of you have questions for Jason, please send them over to me in a private message here in the Para-X chat room. And if you're new to the broadcast and listening live and don't know where to find us, come over to www.para-x.com and join the chat. And Jason, welcome back.
Thank you for having me, Marla. I'm excited to be back. I love the show.
I don't know why it took you so long to write another book, so I'd have an excuse to get back to you, you know.
Well, I have been cranking out courses and focusing a lot on just teaching some things to the strategic sorcery community. So
right.
It has been a while since I've put a book out, but here we are.
And I'm very happy about that. Now, I think people are going to be shocked to hear this, perhaps. And I'm guessing that this is going to stir a pot or two when I bring this up. But there are a lot of people listening in that are not pagan or not spellcrafters. But you brought up a very interesting point in the book that I actually never thought about. But you're absolutely right. You point out that all religions have their sorcery, like Judaism has Kabbalah and various strains of saint magic run through the Catholic world. And there really is kind of a fine line between magic and religion, isn't there?
There really is. And it always kind of amuses me when people ask, can Christians do magic? Right, or can Catholics do magic? Because if you so much as open any grimoire, like any of them, any of the Keys of Solomon, the Grimoire Verum, the Red Dragon, the Black Dragon, whatever it is, the classic grimoires, they're all Catholic. They're all coming from that background. Mm-hmm. So even beyond the saint magic, the hardcore, the hardcore magic is done by Muslims, is done by Jews and Christians and Buddhists and Taoists and you name it.
Yeah, and they point fingers at us, huh?
Well, everybody always points fingers at the other people, and calls what they do magic or evil. And you see, this isn't new either. The Talmud is full of descriptions of Jesus as sort of this crappy sorcerer who had tattoos of spells from Egypt on his body and things like this. So this isn't new, and so magic, I have always said, it's always what the other people do.
Yeah.
But, I think one of the main differences between magic and religion is that magic has an expectation that something is going to work because of the mechanism of how it's done, whereas pure prayer is just sort of like, well, I'd like this, and hopefully the spirits hear me and decide in my favor. But with magic, there's some kind of expectation that this is going to get done one way or another. You're not simply leaving it up to other powers. So there is an effort to influence reality directly. And I joke that, religion came about as a way to explain what happens when magic doesn't influence reality the way we want it to.
It's a whole, it's a whole conglomeration of things on both sides. And I just kind of wish, because religion is mainstream, but we're not, and that always kind of, that wall, they built the wall. And it's just like, why? We are Main Street. I mean, we're normal people. We're everyday people. We do the same things. We pray. We do a spell, you guys pray. You carry a lucky charm, we have amulet. I mean, there's so much that's the same, and yet we're kind of still on the fringes.
Well, that is true, but there is an aspect to specifically to witchcraft that sometimes gets overlooked. So, for instance, if you call yourself a witch, right? Chances are you have maybe some more problems with society at large than someone who calls themselves a druid or asatru or something like that. And one of the reasons is that in the mid 20th century witchcraft revival, it relied upon, it took advantage, not in a bad way taking advantage, but it took advantage of, it relied upon, it drew upon the lore and terminology of the Inquisition, of the witch hunt era, of all the, Malleus Maleficarum type stuff. So, in a way, it's sort of like, we're at the time it was very controversial, and it caught on, and it I don't think Wicca would be where it was without it, but or where it is without it. But in a sense, it was deliberately taking that constellation of terms and mythology, turning it over on its head and saying, well, no, this is actually good. Mm-hmm. But it is still taking something that society had generally looked at as wrong or for hundreds of years, and is saying, well, no, actually, this is good. And I think it's right. I'm on your side, but some of the bias comes simply from that terminology.
Sure. Yeah.
Druids and things, they don't necessarily face the same amount of bias.
Exactly. And a lot of people call themselves witches, but are on so many different paths that it's such an umbrella term that you just never know. You don't know who you're talking to when you talk to a witch, but
absolutely.
Maybe that's part of the beauty. I don't know. But anyway, I had to laugh the other day because I saw this humorous little banner that read something about, do your spells fizzle, then make them sizzle by using this ideal celestial brand wand or something. It was a joke. But it so reminded me of I Love Lucy's Vitamin Vegemin commercial. Are you tired, run down, listless? Do you poop out at parties? And sometimes our spells do fizzle. I mean, we have to admit that. And I'll venture a guess that when that happens, it's something that we did in the process. But here's something that popped into my head a time or two that I want to kind of run past you. Sometimes I think there are other factors at work when we do spell casting or creating besides just human error. It's as if out there somewhere there are watchdogs that might perhaps be overseeing what we're up to and maybe deciding that for whatever reason we shouldn't be casting that particular spell. And they're maybe capable of intervening to make sure it doesn't happen, most likely for our own good. What do you think about that?
Well, it's certainly people can have guides, individuals and so on. But I don't know if I'm on the same page as far as the sort of the magical police force or something.
Okay, good. Okay.
Which I mean that was let's put it this way. I've seen too many people do terrible things successfully.
Right.
And also, proceed then to do more terrible things yet get along in life just fine. So when it comes to stuff like that, I get a little more mechanical. I tend not to believe in the sort of people are overseeing or spirits are overseeing the use of magic kind of idea. Mm-hmm. When things don't happen in magic, and there I certainly agree with you, that anyone who's claiming 100% success rate in magic is lying.
Right.
But when things, or deluding themselves, that's
more to the point. Yes.
Right. That's the other way to go with that one. You're either lying or you're delusional. But that's actually why I changed Crowley's definition of magic from causing change in accordance with will to influencing change in accordance with will, because it explains so much when you start to view magic as an influence. You can start to look at things and say, okay, well, the amount of influence that I was able to muster with this spells or this group of spells or was not up to the task of, getting me elected president in 2016. The probability was not high enough for that to happen. It was not high enough to, do what I wanted to do. Or there were conflicting spells. Or we can then workshop it and say, okay, well, that wasn't enough influence, but maybe we can attack things from multiple angles. So if someone, let's say they're having some kind of a court case, small claims court or something,
Mm-hmm.
well, there are a lot of ways you can skin that cat.
Right.
You can do what I call macro enchantment, just one big spell over the court case so that you win.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also then perform a blessing on your lawyer or yourself to give eloquent speech. You can cast an enchantment upon the judge or even the jury. You can do some magical jury tampering.
And it's probably legal. Yeah.
You can if you have a jinxy or malicious mindset, you can jinx the opposition or the prosecution or defense, whatever side you're not on. Mm-hmm. And so there are all kinds of ways that you can attack the same problem. And if you're looking at it through the lens of influence, then you'll want to try more than one thing right off the bat.
Mm-hmm. Now, some people believe that all witches cast spells, that it's mandatory, like it's part of the contract, page 87, paragraph 5, where we sign in blood and sell our souls to the devil, is all included there. But there are lots of witches who don't cast spells at all, surprisingly to some people. So let's talk for a minute about the importance of spellcrafting before we even get into the book itself, because you make some very good points about spirituality and intention.
Cool. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I'm sorry. I think I lost the first part of the question. You were breaking up for a second.
Oh, okay.
I heard spirituality and intention, but before that
not all witches cast spells.
Oh, yeah.
And so we should kind of talk about the importance of spellcraft before we jump into the book.
Yeah. So, one of the reasons that I came down on calling myself a sorcerer is that there's sort of no mistake that the sorcerer is concerned with practical magic. Because in this day and age, a witch can be a witch for purely religious reasons. I've met a lot of people in the pagan community and even who are deeply involved in covens that have no interest in practical magic. They are interested in worshiping the old gods. They're interested in seasonal festivals. They're interested in community building. They're interested in providing rites of passage for people. And all of these are good things. So that's not that's not a critique. And I think as paganism grows and becomes the major religion where it won't be looked at as sconce, where you just, will show up at work with a pentagram and people treat it like no big deal, just like if you were any other religion, then there has to be room, even more room in that under that umbrella for non-magical people, even people that may not believe in magic. Or the ability of spells to work should be able to fit under that roof. And there are a lot of them now that write for some activists, pagan groups who do not believe in magic. Obviously I disagree with them, but there's room for them in that under that umbrella. But it's true also of magicians, that there are ceremonial magicians who are purely interested in getting closer to God through the Kabbalah, who are purely interested in receiving initiations from angels or transforming their consciousness through various Kabbalistic rites and things like that. And they would never think of casting a spell to affect the world around them. So when it comes to magic, I always like to point out, if you're looking for the tradition of witchcraft that actually does go back in time, that is traceable through text and history, magic is the way to go. Magic is, sorcery is where your spells and such are, where most of that is going to be found.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, I've got a question from the chat room,
Okay.
which is not strange at all. They want to know if spells work best when we create our own, or is it okay to use spells you find in books, and will they be as effective?
So here's the thing. I don't put a ton of stock in do it yourself.
Okay.
I actually, while there is a certain amount of, let's put it this way, your own spells can be more powerful if you are well studied, if you're very experienced, if you know what you're doing, and they're more powerful maybe because they are based upon your years of practice, and therefore they're drawing upon spiritual powers that you have relationships with, and they are fitting the situation that you're in exactly. So in other words, they are crafted to meet the need of the time and place and problem that you're facing. In general, however, there is far too much stock placed in people doing stuff themselves, and people in the idea that anything you come up with yourself is going to be better. It's simply fantasy. Now, I can go and make an athame myself. I can go to a blacksmithing place. I can learn, in probably a few hours the basics of knife making. And I'll come out with an athame that, maybe I'm proud of. And I will also get the satisfaction of having done that. But it's not going to look or function in the way that a master knife maker's knife will work and function and look. It's not. So this is where, if we look at witchcraft as a craft, as we look at sorcery as a craft, then we have to say, well, a craft is something that you can be good at or bad at. It is something that takes more than just whatever I want to throw at it at the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there is, I made a gumbo in my Instant Pot this week, and it was really good. It was damn good because I put a lot of time into cooking and stuff and such. It is not as good as, a master Cajun chef's gumbo. And even then, I followed the directions from someone who really, knows how to do gumbo. If I just sat at home and I said, well, I think a gumbo should have this, 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 and this, it's probably going to taste like a hot mess. I'd burn a roux and then probably just dump a whole bunch of Louisiana hot sauce in it and make so it would not be good. Right. So doing your own stuff, it's wonderful if you're trained and if you're competent. But even when you gain competency, it's also wonderful to take advantage of masters, because we only have so much time, right? We only have so much time in this life. I know how to mix oils, but when I buy an oil from someone who loves making oils, who spends a lot of time doing it, I'm getting something special, and it's not the same. So I guess I have, I wrote a whole chapter about this called DIY is Overrated.
Yes. Yes, you did.
And I guess that's really what I'm getting into, is that this idea that people have that anything you do yourself is better than anything you read. It's a slap in the face. It's a slap in the face to every person that has written their formulas down, that has passed things down, that has initiated others, that upholds a tradition, that has written a book, that has spent years of their life to you know, and it's something where, yes, creativity is a power in and of itself. But it's not the primary power or the only power, and filtered through, you know, a practice that doesn't support it well, it just fizzles.
Yeah.
I compare it to beat writers too. You ever meet like somebody in college that wanted to be a beat writer? They fancied themselves a beat writer, and they would, you know, I don't need to know the rules of English. I don't need to know all the stuff about writing, because I'm just like going to be Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac and just patter it out. And, you know, the thing is, Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, and William Burroughs knew how to write.
Yes.
They broke the rules of writing, but they knew the rules before they broke them. So,
exactly.
Yeah, so I would say go ahead and use someone else's spell. Not only will it be as powerful, might be more powerful.
Good,
and
thanks.
You might learn a hell of a lot, so that when cases come up where you do have to come up with your own spell, you will have some experience behind you.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I should mention right off the bat that this isn't a book just for people new to the craft. It's for newbies. It's for seasoned crafters. And personally, I think it's a book for all of us to have in our libraries. So that's my 2 cents. But it's true. It's true. It's one of the, you know, there are certain books that you read, you appreciate, and there are certain books that you just don't put away. You have them on hand because there's a whole lot of stuff in there. And all right, so the book is divided into 3 parts: setting up a spell, execution, and advancing your craft. And that's where the 21 keys come in. Now, one thing I've always liked about you is that you don't mince words or sugarcoat. You know, you're a straight shooter, and this is great. And there's humor to that too. For example, on key 2, you know, you have all these little kind of cartoons ahead of the things. And on key 2, the title of that one is Stop Making Crappy Goals.
Yep.
I mean, you can't get any more succinct and to the point than that. But seriously, each of the 21 are really key points in putting together all of it. You know, it's things like make sure your life is enchantable, which is something that you really have to think about. Emergency magic is bad medicine. But so you've got 21. Now, is that a magical number? Did you have like 87 that you had to trim down to 21? How did you form that number and to get the perfection out of it?
Oh, you know, 21 is a really magical number. So it, you know, 3 times 7. It's just it doesn't. And then the number itself breaks down to 3. So it's kind of a beautiful number. And in fact, I don't know, I just had it in my head as the right number. But originally, before I wrote this book, I guess about a year or 2 before I wrote the book, I did one of my programs. I run a group of classes for strategic sorcery courses. Students called Arcane Audios that they can sign up for and partake in. So these are like late night 3-hour conference calls where I go in depth about a specific topic, and one of them was 21 keys of spellcrafting. And that formed the basis of this book. But I did change some of, like, one of the original keys was work all the levels. So I talked more about in the class about working with the mental level, with the what I call the level of symbol space, working with the astral level, all the way down to the material level.
Mm-hmm.
But in the book, I ended up replacing it with magic as a rhizome, which was, I think, a more useful idea. Plus, I had already talked about levels in The Sorcerer's Secret, so I didn't want to repeat myself.
Right.
So, there are more keys for sure, and maybe there'll be a follow-up. But, 21 seemed to be just a good, solid number. And they were, they flowed out easily once I decided on the number.
Okay, good. Well, there's a big difference between just getting a result from a spell and getting a result that can change a person's life in a significant way. And some people do spells at the drop of a hat just because they can, it seems, while others only spellcraft when something is vitally important. So should we always look to up the ante and do the best that we can instead of settling for less or taking the easy way out? Or, practice gumball magic, as you call it in the book?
Well, I am... I'm a big believer in weaving magic into your regular life. I am a big believer in, if you're a magician, if you're a witch, if you're doing this, do it. Because if people wait until it's an emergency, if they wait until stuff is falling apart, then either it really is too late to get the best result. You're just sort of managing how the disaster plays out. Or worse, you're perpetuating an untenable situation, which has been for years now what I consider probably the most prevalent danger of magic. It has nothing to do with demons, has nothing to do with possession, has nothing to do with spells backfiring. It has to do with people who really need to be knocked out of their comfort zone because they're stagnating in bad jobs, bad relationships, bad choices, crappy, they dropped out of college at 22, or 21, like I did, and they never went back, and they find themselves at 36 working, at retail for less than it takes to really lead a life at that age, and they whine about it and they bitch about it and they hate it, but it's become comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
It's what was the line from the Declaration of Independence? Mankind has shown that he will put up with almost any kind of discomfort rather than rising up to change their, situation. And it's so true. And what magic does, if you weave sorcery and spellcraft into your everyday, into your strategy, if you're living a life where you're looking to move forward, and then life becomes sacred, and everything you apply magic to becomes sacred, and you invest in yourself, you invest in your own success, and thus, and then this filters out to the people around you.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually become not only concerned and compassionate for the people around you that maybe are having a rough time, but you actually become a person who can do something about it. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big believer in weaving magic into the everyday, not waiting until it's a big deal.
Right.
Because, imagine, I don't know, any other thing that people need in an emergency. Imagine, I'm not a gun owner, but imagine if you were a gun owner and you never went to learn how to use the gun or fired it ever at the range or something like I just have this in case it's an emergency. Well, you should maybe use it a few times before you absolutely need it. You know, when people learn martial arts, they practice it all the time, not just, you know, well, now that I know a little kung fu, I'm not going to do anything with it until my ass is getting kicked.
Good analogies, really.
So I'm a big believer in just, you know, magicking up life and making it part of your existence and your everyday and applying it well.
Okay, that makes very good sense. Now, what about offerings? I mean, is not making, because people don't think about this in spell work all the time, is not making an offering when doing a spell going to make the spell less effective or even fail? Because, again, lots of people just do a spell that someone else created that pretty much consists of a few basic tools. Because here, see, that's the other thing. If you're going to use somebody else's spell, you kind of have to know which ones are better than others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and some of this takes some experimentation on your part, you know?
Right. So, you know, you'll get a spell that has a few basic tools like a candle, incense, or an incantation. No deities are called upon, you know, it's just something really simple. And if someone doesn't have a specific deity in mind, perhaps thinking it's just a pokey little insignificant spell and they don't care, or, you know, whatever. But should we always make offerings to someone, even if it's like a spirit guide that we work with, or, you know, just some kind of generic offering in general? Would that make any sense?
So yes, it does make sense. And it's not that your spell will fail without it. Like, it's just a guaranteed fail. But because obviously people, you know, have done successful magic without offerings. Mm-hmm. But what I will say is that for my students, especially ones that came from a Western occult or Western witchcraft background, because honestly, everyone else already has offerings really well integrated into their magical practices. Where the Western occult scene is sort of alone in that it hasn't, and thankfully that's changing rapidly. But there's really two different ways that people integrate offerings into their practice. There is the gumball magic, which my friend Persephone coined, which is essentially you want something from a spirit, and you've identified that spirit, angel, demon, nature spirit, whatever. You make an offering, you ask for your boon, and perhaps you do something more like some sympathetic magic or something that the spirit can latch onto. You provide it with links and everything else. But essentially you're making an offering in exchange for a service at that time. And then the contract is over, right? You're making a momentary pact. And that's, you know, that can be done. I've done that. A lot of people do that. But the other thing that you can do is just integrate offerings into your daily practice. When I wake up in the morning, I go out, even if I do the ritual inside because it's cold, I then take the incense, place it outside, I pour some water into the ground or some tea into the ground, and then I do something similar at night as well to feed those spirits. So basically, I am laying these things out, and I have a group of spirits that consists of classes of gods and deities, guardian spirits underneath that, local spirits underneath that, the dead underneath that, spirits to whom I owe debt perhaps underneath that, and essentially a big offering to anyone that wants to come and partake. And what this does then is it builds a relationship. So now when you're doing a spell, when you have something that you are applying it to, the whole universe rises up and says, how can we help? You're such an awesome person who's making these offerings all the time. How can we grease the wheels? Even just making offerings to the spirits of the land, of the lakes, the mountains, the forest where you live, can have an enormously drastic impact on the magic that you do. It's huge. It's huge.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly you feel like everything has your back, and it's helping out rather than an obstacle that you have to overcome.
Right. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's technically it should be, and in many cases is a team effort. And
right.
The team doesn't have to be just sitting there in flesh and blood across the room from you, or your coven, whatever. It is a team effort. They're out there. I mean, they truly are. But somebody was kind of talking about this to somebody the other day, and it goes along with you're talking in the book about exercising your agency, and they brought up the age-old question, which you also did too. Why would some mighty deity even care, much less be anxious to help us with a mundane thing, like maybe perhaps trying to keep a neighbor's dog from pooping on our lawns, or, something similar, when there's so many more important things to be concerned about? And you do address this nicely in the book.
Well, I don't even remember how I addressed it in the book.
Well, I'll just tell you, it was good. Now, go ahead.
So, I get this a lot in my Hecate course. In the Sorcery of Hecate, I talk a lot about Hecate is this being that wants you to go beyond. The name means beyond. Literally, just keep growing, keep moving, becoming as she is. Theosis, becoming like the gods, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and then there are these very cosmic descriptions of Hecate in the Chaldean oracles and things like this. And so people then get confused. Well, how can a deity like this also be invoked into Fictione tablets to break the leg of his neighbor's horse so that they lose at the games or something like that? Mm-hmm. And the answer is that these, first of all, these beings are not, they're not single focused in the way, because they're not locked into a physical brain, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So they're not bound by the normal rules of time and space. They can be in more than one place at a time. So it's not a matter of them being more concerned about one thing than another. They have this, deities have this vastness of being. Now, how can they be called upon for relatively petty pursuits? The answer is that they depend upon your agency. They respect and rely upon the agency of their sorcerers or their priests. To put it in Christian terms, we hold sacred in heaven what you hold sacred on earth. Mm-hmm. Christ said, if you say this in my Father's name, it will be done. There's a certain exchange between that which is worshipped and the worshipers, and part of the deal is their intercession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry, just reading a question from the chat room. One thing I really want to bring up too, at the end of each chapter, each key has a takeaway. Now that's kind of a summary that explains what the purpose of that particular key is. But it also sums up the point of the key. It's also a quick reference as well that readers can peek at first if they need some clarification. And that was really a really, really good idea. Just had to throw that your way.
Oh, thanks. It was a way to bring each chapter back around to the comic book, to the comic at the beginning.
Right.
So that, just in case there was any confusion, this is why Sal Fagor is shaking his head in disgust at Harold the Sorcerer.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, favorite advice in the book is this, in my opinion. If you never fail to get a result from the spell, if you never fail at contacting the spirit, if the spirit never says things you don't want to hear, you're really not doing anything at all. Very well put.
That is the case. Yeah. You're living a fantasy life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is I'm not trying to reference or sell courses or anything, but one of the things that happens in my Sorcery of Hecate course is people sign up, and in the first week or two, they start doing this practice, which involves a lot of chanting. It's a pretty heavy duty, requires some commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And they start to have visions, right? They start this immediately. They start to have these visions. And I spend the first month and a half basically going, okay, cool, but don't pay any attention to it. This is not important. And then after a couple of months, I start to say, well, okay, let's evaluate these things. Was there anything here that told you something concrete that you didn't know? Was there anything here that was actionable? Was there anything here that did more than just confirm or make you feel important? No? Ignore it. Let's go on. And I know everybody, your people are now doing like 2 months of work, and they want to have something to show, and I mean, not to be cynical about it, but they also want to impress. They want somebody to be like, oh yes, you are the Kwisatz Haderach. Clearly, you are the chosen one, and it's working on what I call the perception projection ratio.
Mm-hmm.
Every spiritual encounter I and everyone I have ever met has a mixture of of the actual contact that they perceive, and then what they have projected onto it. Mm-hmm. And our job as sorcerers, as magicians, as witches, is to work on that ratio. Is to work on clarifying that, so we're perceiving more and projecting less. Mm-hmm. And if anybody is listening to this and they're thinking to themselves, well, maybe for you, Mr. Miller, but my spiritual contact with Hoot Kumi is absolutely 100% pure perception. I would just turn your literature to, I would turn to you to read how easily memory or perception of physical conversations are with other people. How much of that winds up being perception that is not shared by others, or how much stories differ from 10 people that see the same thing, and how much people project onto that. And then when you consider that a spirit contact is a more subtle thing by nature, it's just a no-brainer. Right? So we have, if you're not surprised by the deity speaking to you, then maybe it's not the deity speaking to you.
Good point. I like that.
If it's not telling you something beyond just yes, whatever you think is really is cosmically ordained, and you should go do that and feel good about yourself while doing it. Then maybe not. Maybe you need to meditate more.
Well, there's that thing about wishful thinking, or witchful thinking, as they call it. It's sometimes voices in your head are very credible. But I digress. Yeah.
And like I said, it's true for me as it is for anybody else. I don't mean, I have had I have made mistakes in spirit contact, and even with Hecate at one time, where I let the projection interrupt the perception, and it cost me, like 2 years worth of work.
Wow.
So this is something I take very seriously, and I apply to myself. So it's as well as anybody else. This isn't me going, well, I, of course, am a great master who doesn't suffer from these problems. Of course I do. Everyone does.
Right. Okay, got one more quick question, then we're going to talk about something else for a second. When is it time to move beyond the basics, move out of your comfort zone, and dare to work outside the columns, as you put it, and move your practice forward? Because a lot of people, as you said, are kind of complacent about what they're doing. Is there something that like kickstarts people, or it's just human nature? Some of us, not of us, not me, but some people just to get real comfortable and just say, okay, that's it.
Well, yeah, absolutely, and it is the point where you're kind of groovy and comfortable. So first of all, I would say you always want to move out of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
If you're taking up witchcraft, if you are breaking the rules of society and common sense,
there you go,
and engaging in witchcraft, in sorcery, in magic, just to maintain the status quo, you really have to think about the choices you've made in life, because that's not a really good use of your time. Mm-hmm. So, when it comes to breaking out of your comfort zone, I would say immediately, right now. Now, as for what I think you're referring to, the third part of the book, like kicking it up a notch, like advancing on the basics. Mm-hmm. Really, it just boils down to getting the basics taken care of, and then moving beyond that. So, for instance, earlier in the book, I talk about goals and what are good goals and bad goals. And I think it's important, especially when you're young, to think in terms of goals. You want to finish college. You want to get a job. You want to start a career. You want to find a significant other or others. You want to, build a life. And in the early stages, this takes thinking in terms of goals. Mm-hmm. And it's doubly important if you're in crisis, right? If you're in debt, if you are maybe, in your 30s and you are undereducated and the job that you had fell apart or the market fell out from under you. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to have goal-oriented thinking. But as you get older, or as you get those things taken care of, I tell people to switch to trajectory-oriented thinking. Stop thinking in terms of, when I get this, I'm done, and start thinking in terms of, I'm never done. I'm on this journey and I'm headed in this direction, and so I've just got to keep moving on this trajectory, because there is no stasis. You're either moving forward or you're moving backward in almost all things. Mm-hmm. And that's why, although I'm initiated as a Buddhist tantric, and I'm ordained as a independent Catholic bishop, I'm a bad at both, because I reject the idea of a final spiritual outcome. That there's this Buddhahood or salvation that is basically, hey, you're done. So for me, it is, no, you're on a trajectory. Keep going, keep going. Yeah. You're not necessarily ever done, or at least given the body and mind that we have, you don't have the capacity to be done.
That's okay. That's a perfect way to say it. Now, because neither of us have done a spell to prolong this hour, I want to get a few things in at the end. because we just have a few minutes left. One thing I want to mention, because there's a lot of people here into astrology and witchcraft and everything, and I was over at your website and found that you have an advanced planetary magic ebook with links to audio files and everything. That sounds really great. But that being said, you've got tons of other things going on, like your strategic sorcery courses and blog. You've got other books, you've got other courses, and you also do consultations. And the consultations aren't like the usual run-of-the-mill readings, because you're doing like divination instruction, you're doing insight about paths, you're doing clarity, sorcery, all types of things. So that's something that I think people need to know, that you're available by phone, by Skype, by email. So bottom line, where can people find out about all of this?
Go to strategicsorcery.net.
See, I talked for like 20 minutes and you said it like, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Go to strategicsorcery.net. It's just right there. There's a link for consult with me. How that all works is going to change a little bit because I have been a little too bogged down to take some consultations. Mm-hmm. That said, I actually enjoy when people want just a straight card reading. I love the Tarot de Marseille and the mm-hmm. French style of reading. So every now and then, if somebody just wants a regular old reading, I'm like, oh, it's wonderful. But I usually I'm going to start to push more and more of those towards email based rather than Skype or Zoom based. The courses, some of my courses are listed there, and then I've got a couple others that you have to already be in the strategic sorcery course to find out about. But I'm a busy little beaver, so I'm always doing something.
Yes, you are, and I think people need to get busy looking up your books, reading your books. I mean, anybody that's interested in what we do and who we are and what you can do to make yourselves better and improve, get the books, seriously. And I learned a lot. I mean, just reading this one, I picked up things that, I thought, didn't think of that. And so you can't teach an old witch new tricks. And, like I said.
Best compliment ever.
Well, yeah, sort of. I'll think of a better one next time. But I really do think that this is a book that everybody should have in their library, really important. And I really want to thank you for writing it and then showing up tonight, because it always makes me smile when I see your name on my show calendar, and I look forward to your visits. So basically, you just need to promise me that you will come back sooner than 3 or 4 years, even if you haven't written a book.
I will come back. If I haven't written a book by this time next year, I will come and seek you out.
Oh, good. I haven't been sought out in a while. That'll be nice.
I'll talk tarot. I'll talk courses. We'll talk something.
Yeah, there's plenty to talk about. So again, thank you so much. And of course, we have to thank everybody for listening in as well, both live and on podcast. And just know that I really appreciate you all. And until next time, everybody, blessed be and merry meet again. Good night.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Stirring the Cauldron with Marla Brooks. Please join us again next week at the same time for another great guest and more cauldron stirring. Any rebroadcast or other use of this program without explicit permission is strictly prohibited. Copyright 2018. The Path of the Goblin King by Kevin MacLeod is licensed through Incompetech.com.